After months and months of rumors, speculation, and little bits of truth here and there, both Microsoft and Sony decided to unveil the full system specifications for the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 this week. A month earlier, Microsoft put Sony in a bit of an awkward position by providing some details about the Series X's hardware configuration with a particular focus on the GPU. However, it wasn't until this week's tell-all reveal that we got to see hard numbers for all the components in the Series X. That announcement was closely followed by Sony's own, where we saw PlayStation 5 specs for the first time. Both consoles are a major step forward. The biggest takeaway from Sony and Microsoft's respective product reveals is that the two console makers clearly learned their lessons from the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One launches. The 7th gen consoles, the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, had followed a loss leader approach to pricing. They were high-end parts for the time. Throughout their life cycles, they either sold at a loss compared to the bill of material or at a marginal profit. The idea was to put the very best hardware into the consoles, so that the games justifying a $60 price tag could be produced and sold. With their from-game sales, Sony and Microsoft would recoup their losses and turn a profit over the lifetime of a given console unit. With both the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, however, the console makers decided to be much more conservative in hardware terms. They paired moderately fast GPUs for the time with low-power processors that were barely faster than their 8-year-old predecessors to hit lower price points while still yielding a profit per unit. Microsoft's approach was even worse. The Xbox One was originally envisioned as an all-in-one media system, hence the "one" in quotations. The non-optional bundled Kinect meant that it was more expensive than the PlayStation 4, despite having weaker hardware. The entire 8th gen was characterized by compromise and terrible performance. As far back as 2013, with Call of Duty Ghosts, the Xbox One was delivering a paltry 720p output, while the PlayStation 4 delivered 900p in a number of multiplats. Following the disastrous reception to their technically ambitious Assassin's Creed Unity, Ubisoft scaled down their crowd and rendering systems. Sub-30 FPS performance figures have come to be seen as standard on multiplats, as has poor image quality and a visual composition that's often worse than the low preset on PC. Moreover, the weak CPUs fundamentally hamstringed any attempt at gameplay innovation, since these consoles lacked the processing horsepower to deliver advanced AI or world building. In a very real way, the past 7 years have been a period of stagnation in terms of gaming technology. It looks like the 9th gen consoles are finally set to break the cycle. The machines that both Sony and Microsoft shared are hugely ambitious and even have features not yet available on PC. Overall, these are much more balanced designs, with a strong CPU backing a powerful GPU and paired with ample memory and fast storage. There's little in the way of compromise with either console. This tells us that both the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are likely to cost more than their predecessors. And even factoring in the increased cost, Sony and Microsoft margins will either be slim or negative. As far as consumers are concerned, this is great news. It means that gaming technology can finally start moving again. While both consoles are immensely capable, there were some key differences to their specs, which point to different priorities and, likely, to different target price points. Let's take a look at the points of differentiation. CPU, a minor edge for the Xbox Series X, but no game changer. We're very happy with the CPU capabilities of both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5. Both consoles are using what appears to be the same CPU from AMD, a semi-custom design with 8 cores and 16 threads based on the Zen 2 architecture. The processors in question here are functionally identical to AMD's desktop Ryzen 3700X, albeit running at slightly lower clocks. With regards to clock speeds, Microsoft and Sony have taken slightly different approaches. Microsoft has apparently allocated a slightly higher power budget for the CPU. This allows them to run it at a locked 3.8 GHz when SMT is disabled and 3.6 GHz when it's enabled. Sony, on the other hand, has opted for a more dynamic approach to clock speeds, allowing it to deliver largely comparable performance on a more moderate power budget. The PlayStation 5 has a capped max clock speed of 3.5 GHz with SMT when the power budget allows. In power-constrained situations, this might drop to 3.4 or 3.3 GHz in worst-case scenarios. Mark Cerny did indicate that the max CPU clock speed is a typical figure. The PlayStation 5 CPU will spend most of its time at 3.5 GHz. What does this mean when it comes to comparing the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5? In a typical scenario with a 9th gen multi-platform game, the Xbox Series X will be running at 3.6 GHz with all 16 threads enabled. The PlayStation 5 will run at 3.5 GHz most of the time with 16 threads enabled. The lower bound of the performance delta then is a trivial 3%. In a typical gaming workload, the PlayStation 5 will deliver 97% of the processing power of the Xbox Series X. If we factor in the PlayStation 5's dedicated add-on hardware, such as the Tempest engine and the I/O controllers, there might even be scenarios where games have more CPU power on tap on Sony's console than on the Xbox Series X. When the workload increases though, we expect the PS5's CPU clocks to drop down to 3.3 GHz at worst. In this scenario, the performance delta would be roughly 10%. Again, neither of these CPUs is weak enough to bottleneck their GPUs. We don't think this performance delta will have a measurable impact on games. There is one scenario where the different CPU capabilities become more pronounced, however. The Xbox Series X has an optional SMT off mode where it runs as an 8-core, 8-thread part. This helps with compatibility as cross-gen titles will be authored with the Xbox One X's 8-core, 8-thread CPU in mind and will balance loads for that particular configuration. Microsoft themselves said that they don't expect many launch-era titles to saturate 16 threads. In the case of games that use 8 threads at most, Microsoft has a considerable clock speed advantage. At 3.8 GHz, the Xbox Series X's CPU is nearly 10% faster than the PS5's best-case scenario. In a situation where the PS5 drops down to 3.3 GHz, that rift widens to roughly 15%. In games where single-threaded performance matters, that might have a tangible impact on frame rates and frame times. There will likely be situations where the 1% lows are lower on the PlayStation 5 than on 3 Xbox Series X. In most use cases, however, you'll struggle to tell apart the two in terms of their CPU capabilities. There is a big but if here. While the Xbox Series X delivers better peak CPU performance, Microsoft's stated commitment to maintaining cross-gen compatibility means that most, if not all, first-party titles on the Xbox Series X will be compatible with the Xbox One X. Considering the massive performance delta between the two, this means that a number of Xbox Series X launch titles won't be using even a fraction of the CPU power available. At least in the cross-gen period, we might actually see PS5 exclusives deliver more of a generational leap in terms of gameplay, physics, and AI because of this. GPU, wider and slower versus narrower and faster. In objective terms, the Xbox Series X has a more powerful GPU than the PlayStation 5. The massive 52CU RDNA 2 GPU is the largest post-GCN GPU that AMD has produced to date. Running at 1800 MHz, which is a typical clock speed for Navi parts, it delivers a prodigious 12 T-flops of raw compute power. On the surface, there'd appear to be no contest between this and Sony's much smaller 36CU GPU on the PlayStation 5. However, Sony's managed to get the PlayStation 5's GPU running at 2.23 GHz, which is a higher clock speed than any Navi card in the market, and at the upper bounds of what's possible with Navi 10 overclocking. As a result, the PlayStation 5 delivers 10.28 T-flops of compute, which is roughly 15% less than the Series X. However, and as Sony has made sure to point out, shader resources aren't the only thing that scales with clock speeds. Other functional units on a GPU, including, for example, the ROPs and the TMUs, scale their throughput with the GPU core clock speed. That means that there are elements of the PlayStation 5's GPU that run considerably faster than those in the Xbox Series X, on account of a nearly 25% clock speed advantage. Theoretically, this should mean that the GPU performance delta between the PS5 and Xbox Series X is less than the 15% margin suggested by the compute numbers. In practice, the answer is a bit more complicated. Tests on PC have clearly indicated that the Navi, at least first-gen RDNA parts like the RX 5700 XT, don't offer fantastic clock speed scaling in actual gaming workloads. Using hacks like the More Power tool, it's possible to get the RX 5700 XT and RX 5700, a close analog to the PS5 GPU with 36 CUs and 448 gigabytes per second of memory bandwidth, running at 2.1 to 2.2 gigahertz. This represents an 18 to 20% increase in clock speeds over stock clocks. With such a massive uptick in clock speeds, it's reasonable to expect significant performance gains. However, scaling is frankly terrible. Running at 2.1 GHz in TechSpot's benchmark test, the RX 5700 XT only delivered a 10% performance boost at best, with many games running just 5 to 7% faster. Real-world numbers put Sony's clock speed theory into question. Instead of better than linear scaling, real-world figures show the exact opposite and indicate that GPU performance hews more closely to the total amount of shader resources. This means that the 15% notional performance delta between the PlayStation 5's and Xbox Series X's GPU doesn't tell the whole story. In practice, the Xbox Series X might deliver as much as 25 to 30% better GPU performance. Both of these consoles target 4K experiences, and it looks like the Xbox Series X is far more suited to actually hitting the target. We wouldn't be surprised to see 1800p remain a norm on the PlayStation 5. Storage and memory. Storage is one area where Sony has a clear advantage over Microsoft. The PlayStation 5's custom 825GB SSD has a theoretical transfer rate of over 8 GB per second, factoring in its compression algorithm. This allows it to fill up the PS5's 16GB of shared memory in just 2 seconds. The Xbox Series X, on the other hand, features an NVMe SSD that offers a guaranteed 2.4 GB per second of throughput. It's important here to remember that neither of these figures is exactly lacking. 7200 RPM hard drives offer peak transfer rates of around 200 megabytes per second, which is less than 10% of what the Xbox Series X manages. 2.4 gigabytes per second is blazing fast. Nevertheless, the PlayStation 5 delivers over 2 times the nominal storage throughput and over 4 times the notional throughput once we factor in compression. The Xbox Series X's SSD is evidently fast enough to enable features like quick resume and eliminating in-game loading screens, as well as the extended memory concept. At this point, we're not quite sure how the PlayStation 5's significantly faster SSD will or can be used, though again, minimized loading times and enhanced asset streaming are likely to be key use cases. In terms of memory, the PlayStation 5 offers developers a unified 16GB pool of GDDR6 across a 256-bit memory bus for 448 GB per second of bandwidth. The Xbox Series X, in contrast, offers 10 GB of memory at 560 GB per second and a further 6 GB at 336 GB per second. While split memory architectures have had a bad rap, the GTX 970 and the PlayStation 3 come to mind, 10 GB is a lot of very high-speed memory. By using the 6 GB for less critical purposes, the Series X can utilize most of the high-speed memory for the GPU and leverage that bandwidth to scale better at 4K. All in all, the memory configuration for the Series X is just better suited to the 9th Gen 4K resolution standard. Conclusion. Both the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 offer a genuine leap in capabilities over their 8th Gen counterparts. These are consoles capable of delivering true 4K experiences with none of the compromises introduced by the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X. Their enhanced CPUs make new kinds of gameplay experiences possible. And while the two consoles appear to be very similar, both are Zen 2 RDNA 2 boxes with largely comparable GPU and CPU capabilities, add-ons like the PS5's Tempest engine, and features like enforced cross-gen compatibility, at least at the outset of the Xbox Series X's launch, mean that buyers might have real options on their hand when holiday 2020 rolls by. And that wraps it up. If you like what we are doing, please consider subscribing to our channel, and don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon. That way you will never miss out on any of our videos.